Hello there, future historians, and welcome to the Egypt All-Stars revealing documentary regarding the renowned Pharaoh Djer from the first dynasty of ancient Egypt. As we dig deep into the bowels of history, we will be examining not only the distinguished Djer, but also the pre-dynastic era which preceded him. In this interactive narrative, we will give you one of the first close-up and personal looks at this remarkable king, Pharaoh Djer. Let's begin with the pre-dynastic period. The pre-dynastic period began around 5000 BC and ended around the year 3000 BC. During this era, there were several different periods of people, the first occurring between the years 5000 and 4400 BC, the Badarians. A semi-nomadic people, the Badarians formed small settlements on the eastern bank of the Nile and had some of the first documented burials. The remains were discovered on the outskirts of their nomadic dwellings known to us today as pit graves. They even honored their deceased domesticated animals with ceremonial burials. While their human burials were simplistic at best, they did not mummify their dead as typically portrayed in Hollywood films. Instead, they placed the bodies of their deceased into pits with the heads facing west towards the sun. This culture is one of the first to honor their dead with grave goods found within the pits themselves. And for those budding historians who don't know what grave goods are, these are ceremonial objects placed within the graves for the newly departed to take with them into the afterlife. We have discovered items such as fertility idols, ceramics, and jewelry discovered deep within the pits. After the Badarian culture, the Naqada culture appeared around the years 4500 BC and is debatably one of the most important periods of the pre-dynastic eras. The Naqadan culture has been dissected into three identifiable periods known to us today as Naqada 1, 2, and 3. Running parallel to the Badarian culture, Naqada 1 eventually surpassed the unadaptable culture. Similar to the Badarians, they lived in small settlements in the Nile Valley. They are mostly known for their abundance of clay-bearded figurines, as well as their fertility icons. These figurines were buried with the intent to keep the deceased company into the afterlife. Because they mastered the art of agriculture and irrigation, the people of Naqada II did not have to hunt for their food like their ancestors. The Naqada II culture continued to flourish up until the year 3500 BC, and their artistic tendency continued to grow, including dramatic changes in pottery and woodcarving. As the years passed, their burial rituals evolved, and they began to create rectangular graves with masonry, or wooden walls known as mastabas. The body was no longer specifically angled toward the setting sun, and, interestingly, the quality of grave goods during this period started to reflect economic social classes. Many contained pottery that had been shattered in a ritualistic manner. The buildings of timber and matting of the Naqada II peoples are later reflected in the building structure of Djer's tomb, but more on that to come later. Finishing off the run of the Naqada culture, 3200 to 3000 BC, the people of Naqada III have often been referred to as Dynasty 0. For the first time, there is evidence of a difference in the culture of Upper and Lower Egypt. According to that discovered on the Palermo stone, there were around 20 different kings during this first dynasty. Djer was the second king of the first dynasty. During this time, the pharaohs still ruled from Memphis. He was the son of Aha, and one of Aha's less significant wives, a woman called Hent. Djer constructed a palace at Memphis where he governed Egypt for 50 years. He also led a successful military campaign in Sinai at the Battle of Hexus. Djer was married to Queen Hernith. He was entombed in a mortuary complex which is said to be the true grave of the deity Osiris. Pharaoh Djer's long rule was a period of great success in all aspects of society, such as art, workmanship, science, and medicine. Djer himself was a great physician and had many compositions about the treatment of diseases that were used for some 3,000 years after his death. Djer's tomb at Abydos was perhaps the largest and most complex of those established during Egypt's first dynasty, and was even accompanied with the sacrificial burial of 318 of Djer's retainers within close proximity. Djer is accredited with initiating the long-standing Old Kingdom tradition of enveloping the royal tomb with markers and expressions of grandeur. Djer's legacy and the significance of his tombs, however, were dramatically transformed over 1,000 years later during the Middle Kingdom's 13th dynasty. The Egyptians of antiquity were well aware that the el-Ga'ab site at Abydos contained the gravesite of Egypt's first kings, and at some point during the 11th dynasty, for reasons we only speculate upon, they selected the site of Djer's tomb to represent and serve as the ceremonial burial chamber and tomb of the great god Osiris. At this point, the attention given to the tomb was rather minimal, though we can see some limited dedications, such as an offering table attributable to the 11th dynasty pharaoh Mentuhotep III, and a stele believed to have been contributed by 12th dynasty pharaoh Amenemhet II. As Djer's tomb exceedingly became a focal point for the cult of Osiris, it became necessary to preserve the perceived sanctity of the land by outlawing the construction of individual tombs in the enveloping area. 13th dynasty pharaoh Wagaf even erected 4 stelae at el-Ga'ab, marking the land as sacred and threatening potential profaners with the punishment of death, apparently allowing Egyptians to attend the site as long as they were either paying tribute to Osiris or participating in the renowned festival of Osiris. The festival celebrated in honor of the god and was composed of several ceremonies and processions which reminded attendants of the Osirian myth, and, as proposed by numerous Egyptologists, was partly responsible for the long-standing association between Djer's tomb and that of Osiris's. Wagaf's choice to sanctify the tomb and its surrounding region was further elaborated upon by one of Wagaf's successors, Pharaoh Djer. Djer extensively modified Djer's tomb by constructing a staircase at the tomb's entrance for the convenience of pilgrims to the site, and by dedicating a brick-shaped bed littered with seeds, enclosing the recessed image of Osiris. The Osiris bed was meant to germinate while bathed in the darkness of the tomb. Grain was to grow from the body of the god as his soul overlooked, forever free to harvest it as he wished. As the ancient Egyptians saw it, grain grows and is cut down again only to grow anew, just as the dead would die and ultimately rise again. Djer also adorned Djer's tomb with a large black basalt sculpture with the image of the recumbent Osiris resting on his left side while lying on a bear, a piece of furniture. The 2 sides of the bear were formed by the bodies of 2 lions, with hawks representing Osiris' son Horus, he himself a god, guarding each corner. The statue depicted Osiris with a falcon, a common representative image of his godly wife Isis, straddling the god's loins in order to impregnate herself with the seed that would become Horus. In 1895, the tomb of Djer was excavated by Emile Emiliano, who originally believed it to hold the remains of Osiris. He was a very poor archaeologist and cleared out the tomb between January 1st and January 12th, keeping only the complete objects and discarding entire hordes of artifacts that he felt had no value. He found a small statue and a skull in one chamber of the tomb and quite arbitrarily decided that he had found the tomb of Osiris himself. Even though the skull was later identified as a woman, his view never changed. The tombs were completely re-excavated by Flinders Petrie in 1900, who found many things that Emiliano had overlooked or discarded. The volumes he produced to document the excavation became the model for future archaeological work. One of the most curious tales of early archaeology at Abydos is the case of the missing arm. British archaeologist Flinders Petrie, who took over excavations at Abydos in 1899, was a much more careful and methodical digger than Emiliano, and he went back and re-excavated many of Emiliano's sites to document them properly. In the tomb of First Dynasty Pharaoh Djer, he found a mummified arm adorned with beautiful gold and jeweled bracelets tucked into a small hole in the wall of the tomb. He thought it was the arm of Djer's queen. Others have speculated it might have been the arm of Djer himself, or perhaps just a noble entombed near the king. The truth may never be known. When Petrie dutifully sent the arm, its linen wrappings, and the bracelets to the Cairo Museum, the curator cut away the bracelets for display and simply threw away the old arm and linen. As Petrie summed up those times, a museum is a dangerous place.
Hawati entawi tem jefa kau ta pen em awef mu f ta f sem f menemenet f nebet hayet nebet henenet nebet jedefuet f awet f haset semau em sanuet Set netidiev mirau ev nefem market ridev shesep en herkeku em tepidu eyet jet ev demen eseret sen sebau